You have had what you call God experiences, which have led you to conduct a study into God experiences of thousands of people of different religions over your career. Let's start at the beginning with your own God experience.
Well, I had this profound God experience, probably in 1964, and I began to think about going into ministry. Well, that was really crazy. And of course, in 1967, women were not welcome at seminary, and the closest seminary was a Methodist seminary. And they particularly did not want any women, and they didn't especially want a married woman with children because my place was in the home. I filled out an application, and there was no way that they could deny the application. So they let me in on a provisional basis that I would have to demonstrate that I was both worthy and able to do. And I'm a hard worker, and I like to study, and I like to read, and so they admitted me, and I was provisional for a year. And then the compromise was, well, okay, we won't let her take Bible or preaching or theology. How about pastoral counseling? That would be good. And because I had a degree, undergrad degree in psychology, that was okay with me. But that eliminated me from the mainstream of the seminary. There was one other woman, and she was not married and had, of course, no children. And she was okay because she was going into Christian education, but I was going into ordained ministry and pastoral ministry. And so we argued our way through 3 years of seminary education. Meanwhile, I took every pastoral counseling course I could take, which was wonderful, actually. They had psychiatrists on their staff who worked with us, and at the time, I had a small private practice, and so it was a wonderful training. I learned nothing about the church, and then they hoped I would go away and not ask to be ordained, but I didn't go away. And so the compromise was to pronounce me as a non-unanimous candidate for ministry publicly, so they could wash their hands of the whole situation. And when I spoke to the bishop, he said afterward, he said, nobody's going to hire you. We don't want a woman. Nobody wants a woman. And that was the end of my seminary education and my relationship with the Methodist Church.
When you say non unanimous, does that mean that you were ordained?
I was ordained, but they wanted publicly announced that not everybody wanted me to be ordained. That was devastating.
So then what happened?
Almost immediately, the women from the Glenview Community Church called me and said, we would like to meet you, and we're interested in hiring you as a minister to the women of the church. I was thrilled because as far as the Methodist Church was concerned, there was no job. So we talked. They said, this is what we want. We'll give you your own office. And I said yes, and they said, wonderful, we'll start at X day. What they didn't do was to talk to anybody on the staff of the church. They didn't talk to the senior minister nor the other clergy involved. So when I arrived, nobody was expecting me. But the women had determined that this was important. And for me, it was another God gift because there were no jobs available. And so I became extremely controversial at the church. I got a lot of hate mail. I was not allowed to participate in worship. As a matter of fact, I wasn't even welcomed in the sanctuary. I had an office on the second floor. And my ministry was supposed to be a counseling ministry. But I also started to do groups of people who wanted to talk about God. So we had a women's group and then another women's group. And then some men said, well, would you do a group? Well, my ministry kept growing. And there were people who were absolutely in opposition to my being there, partly because I was a woman, but partly because they saw me as entering through the back door. I didn't go properly into the church.
Now, I remember you talked about how at one point some of the church members came and took your desk out of the office. Do you want to tell that story?
There was a persistent group of people that really wanted to get rid of me, and they, I guess, got pretty desperate. And one day, half a dozen of them, men and women, walked into my office when I was working with a group. They didn't knock, they walked in. And they went over. My office was divided into a couch and some chairs on one side, and my desk, my telephone. We watched while they picked up my desk and took it out, and my chair, and my telephone, and the lamp, and everything that was on that side. And I said to them, "Why are you doing this?" And they said, "Because we don't want you here." And I was stunned. So was the group. And the group decided to do something quite amazingly wonderful. They knew that they weren't going to succeed in getting rid of me. But they went out and they bought a used desk and they refinished it. They put flowers on it. They put their names around the bottom. They put a message in the center drawer. And they brought that to me to replace the desk. What I loved about it was they didn't go after this group with "how dare you," and all that stuff. They did this. I didn't ask them to do this, but they did this. And the fact that they wrote their names on it was really, was very special. They put some of my music that I'd written on the side. And that was the end of, nobody else tried to move me out by moving my furniture out. But if God had not been with me, I couldn't have withstood the anger and the hate that some people had for me being there. And I was quietly doing my counseling ministry and doing groups. But I wasn't allowed to go to the clergy meetings. I couldn't participate in worship.
Did the women not ask for permission because they knew they weren't going to get it?
They said, "This is our business. We're going to pay her. We'll outfit an office for her. She's ours, so buzz off." Finally, after 4+ years, the powers that be said, "We have to either make this official or ask you to leave." So with a very difficult vote and all that, I was finally officially not part of the staff, but it was okay that the women had hired me. I stayed there for 10 years and established a program of small groups. Had several women go into ministry based on the fact that I had done that. So when it felt like the program was finally established, I left. So I was right at that edge of women really entering into ministry in a more significant way.
During that time, you pursued a PhD in psychology.
In that time, I got a PhD. I decided that I could not go through another church experience of all that hatred. I had done it for 10 years. That was as much as and the only way that I could continue my ministry was to begin my own church. So I did an experimental church, meeting once a month, Friday night. And it grew to be a lovely interfaith community, and we still meet periodically, so that's lovely. But I couldn't go through another experience like that. I knew my limits. And I wanted to do an experimental church. I really wanted to look at the church in the broadest context, not just Sunday morning, but how do you do church and open those doors to everybody? We called it the New Church. We met the first Friday evening of the month for dinner, which we cooked together, and worship. And then we met one other evening so that you could belong to a traditional church and you could be part of this, which I call the New Church, a caring community. And I called it a caring community because I had just lived through nearly 10 years of being in a non-caring community, and I wanted to establish it myself. And it became almost immediately an interfaith community. This was 1970. Catholics heard about us first, then some Episcopalians drifted in, and then we began to get a few Jewish people, and ultimately at the end we finally had a Muslim.
How long did you have that church?
Active, we celebrate 25 years together. We still get together periodically.
And then you went on to a very large project, a spiritual healing project with your husband. Tell me about that.
Another God moment where I got back in touch with my own experience of God. And I thought to myself, well, if this has happened to me, it's happened to other people. I would like to meet them. So I put together a proposal for the denomination. So I wanted to do it right. And the proposal was that I would pick out a dozen churches in the Chicago area from the United Church of Christ. And I would put together a questionnaire for people to fill out. And then I would have an open meeting opportunity for people to share a God moment if they had one and were willing to share. So I took it to the denomination, and the denomination said, no, we're not interested. I did not change my mind. I thought it was important to do. So I went back and I said, I will pay for this study. I want you to know what I'm doing. I want you to keep up with it. I want you to critique it. I want you to put your understanding into this. I'd like to not do it alone. And the response was, well, let's see what you do. And you better invite more than 12 churches because that's not enough. So at that point, my energy got aroused. So I worked for 2 years with some statisticians. I said, here are the 4,500 or whatever number of, I want a perfect statistical sample for this study. And we put it together and came out with 100 churches located all over the United States. Big ones, little ones, single pastor, multi-pastor, the whole thing. Perfect statistical sample. And I sent a letter out to each one of them saying, would you let me, a stranger, come in and talk about spiritual life and spiritual healing at the time to anybody who would talk to me. It's not going to cost you anything. I'll pay for everything. Would you consider? I got 99 yeses in about 2 weeks' time. And then I added the 100th so I would have it. And then I went back to the denomination and said, here's my sample. I'm going to do this. I will keep in touch with you. So it took 2 years because I have a practice as a psychologist full-time. I have children, I have a husband. I took my husband with me, and we covered the whole country. It took 2 years. Everywhere I went, people wanted to share God experiences. We never went to a church where they didn't.
All United Church of Christ?
All UCC. Then, because I am a baptized Episcopalian, I repeated the study in the Episcopal Church in the Chicago area, small study. And then, because I was really determined by this time, I met with a rabbi in Chicago, and we chose a sample of Jewish synagogues in Wisconsin and Illinois. I visited them. And then, not to leave the Muslims out, my husband and I moved to New York State to be near our grandchildren, and I was at a baseball game, Little League baseball game, watching one of my grandkids play. A woman next to me, I didn't know her, fell in conversation, and she finally said, well, why did you move here? And I said, well, I have these grandchildren. And I said, I have this study, and I'm looking for a Muslim population, and I don't suppose there is one in Rochester. And she said, there is one, and I have a connection. I will get you in touch with the local imam. So we started our Muslim work there, continued the Muslim work down in Florida. So now I had a complete, intact study of spiritual life. And of course, what do we find everywhere? People have God experiences. They don't talk about them, but they have God experiences. It did not surprise me. It just made me more determined than ever to continue this project. And then through the grace of God, when we had all these groups in the study, I gave a talk to parish nurses in St. Louis. And one of them said, Bobbie, you ought to get in touch with George Gallup. I know he'd like what you're doing. And I said, how will I do that? And she said, I don't know, but I think you should. So I was able to get his number through the Gallup organization, and I called him. So you don't know me, but he said, I'd like to meet you. And I said, well, I have my experience, and I have, by this time, 2,000 9-page questionnaires. So before I met him, I didn't know what to do with my questionnaires because I couldn't afford to have them data processed. And my son, who was a research psychologist, got in touch with some friends of his at Johns Hopkins and asked if there was some way they could data process my questionnaires. And they agreed to do that at a price I could afford. So just before I met George, 2,000 questionnaires were data processed at Johns Hopkins. So I now had hard data. So George looked at the data, which was different from the way the Gallup organization gathers data, and said, will you write a book? And I said, I will. And will you write the foreword to the book? And he said, I will. So we spent several weekends with him in Princeton, and he thought that our data was absolutely on target. and we became very close friends. So I'm armed now with more material. So I said, okay, God, and developed this spiritual life team concept of people, small groups getting together. I wrote a workbook taking them through the process of identifying and normalizing their own God experiences. And I did a 4-day weekend for clergy in Orlando, Florida. And out of that meeting, which went really well, the pastor of the Cocoa Beach Community Church said, come to my church, start your program here, do anything you want. We'll pay for you to fly from Chicago to Cocoa Beach. We'll pay for you to stay 3 months in Cocoa Beach. Just come. So I wrote a small group program for people to learn how to identify their God experiences and share them in a small group setting, and also learn how to pray out loud. And it started in Cocoa Beach, and I've been doing that program since 2013. It is always successful. People learn how to identify God moments. They learn how to pray out loud. I don't do any psychology. It's not therapy. It's not we're going to fix you to make you better and happier. It's all about an experience that I have had with God that I am willing to share. And because I hate it when I go to meetings and everybody says, is there a clergy person around so we can pray? And so I have a cause celeb to get lay people to pray out loud. So those are the two goals of the program.
What did the data show?
The data showed that people had experiences of the presence or action of God. They could identify the experience. They had not, for the most part, ever shared it. And probably one of the least likely places to share it was going to be in their religious congregation. So I have unleashed a population of people who can identify God and can talk about God and can pray out loud. And I've introduced a new process which is not psychological, but is spiritual, which is not there to fix anybody, but to allow people to identify God and pray and then see what happens. So these are not therapy groups, but they're very healing. And I love leaving my psychology outside so we can see what spiritual life is all about.